member for Kingston and the Islands, the Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And you know, this being Family Day in Ontario, I just want to start, Mr. Speaker, by wishing a happy Family Day, in particular to my family, my wife Vanessa, my son Mason, who's probably playing video games right now, and my two very young ones, Vivian and Frankie, who are probably watching this. I can't wait till I get to leave today and come home, but you better be asleep by the time that I get there, and I'll see you in the morning. Mr. Speaker, I have been listening to this debate for the last 4 days, and I have heard a lot of different things being said in this House, and I want to get into the details of those. But before I do, I want to take the opportunity to thank the men and women from police forces across the country. The manner in which this operation in Ottawa particularly was handled, it was nothing short of the gold standard in terms of how policing operations like this need to happen. And so I thank them for everything that they did to make Ottawa stay safe during the removal of the occupiers. I'll start by saying, Mr. Speaker, I have been perplexed since the beginning of this with the position of the Conservative Party of Canada, the party that tells people they stand up for law and order, and the way that they have been responding to this particular issue. And I'm not even talking about this vote or this debate. I'm talking about the way that they've responded to everything that has happened within the last 3 to 4 weeks is absolutely astounding. Shameful. Encouraging occupiers not to leave, telling them to stay in Ottawa because what they're doing is working, when they know full well that they're breaking the law. And that brings me to a very important point. It's this concept of the difference between an occupation and a protest. We've heard day after day Conservative get up in this House and talk about this as a peaceful protest. The member who spoke just shortly before me, the member from Kildonan St. Paul, said it was a lawful protest. It was not a lawful protest. This was an occupation, Mr. Speaker. You know, I find it remarkable that they would take this position. And the irony is the longer it went on, the more they encouraged it, the more emboldened those outside became. You know, I have a ton of respect for the member from Windsor West, the NDP member, who got up time after time when people, in particular Conservatives and the Bloc, would get up and say, oh, well, there's no problems at the Windsor, the Ambassador Bridge, there's no problems in Windsor, everything there is fine. He must have corrected the record about 20 to 25 times in the last 4 days, that's not the case, and he said it's only a 2-kilometer drive from from where I'm sitting right now, but somehow they weren't even able to take the word from him. I have heard a number of outrageous and false statements in this House over the last 4 days. And I'll start with the one that probably got the biggest reaction out of me. The member from Lambton, Kent, Middlesex referred to what was going on over the last 3 weeks as Canada Day times 1,000. She said that. She's quoted in Hansard. You can see the video. She said that was like Canada Day times 1,000. Yeah, can you believe that? I wonder if the residents of Ottawa feel the same way. The member from Wagina, Wascana, who replaced Ralph Goodell, said in this House, sitting right over there, Mr. Speaker, he said, well, I didn't see any problem. I walked up Metcalfe Street. I didn't see Al-Qaeda or the Taliban. Amazing. As if that's the standard by which the party of law and order measures what an emergency is. The member from Haldimand Northfork said that we somehow live in an authoritarian and totalitarian dictatorship. This is a parliamentary democracy. She said it in this House. The member from Foothills said all that the occupiers at the Coots border crossing wanted was to be heard. 13 people were arrested in conjunction with the seizure of weapons and ammunition. The member from Abbotsford, although just one because so many of them said it, referred to what is going on right now as martial law. Martial law is when the military is literally walking on the street. Martial law means the military has taken over the civil duties of the police. That is absolutely ridiculous. I've heard from a number of members, including the member from King Vaughan, who talked about bank runs, suggesting that there's going to be bank runs out there because people suddenly want to take all the money out of their accounts. If anything, it's based on the misinformation that they've been spreading. Or the member from Grand Prairie Mackenzie, who talked about suspending civil liberties. We'll talk about conflating the War Measures Act, the previous act, with what we actually have in the Emergency Measures Act. And so I want to talk about the Emergency Measures Act. The Emergency Measures Act was actually brought in by a progressive conservative government. Don't for a second think that who's sitting across the way actually is part of that party. Maybe you are, Mr. Speaker, but the rest of them aren't. It was seconded. The bill was seconded by my predecessor, Flora MacDonald, a true progressive conservative. Yeah. It was nothing like the War Measures Act. The only connection it had to the War Measures Act was it was meant to remove it. Mm-hmm. It specifically says, and this is how it differs, it's temporary, 30 days or less, and it's subject to quick Parliament review. It takes 20 members to sign and ask for another debate. It's targeted and used only where needed. The War Measures Act wasn't. It's proportionate. The responses used in the authorities within that act need to be proportionate to what the emergency is. The War Measures Act didn't have that. And most importantly, it upholds the civil liberties. It upholds the Charter of Rights, which the War Measures Act didn't do. So when the member from Grand Prairie Mackenzie said it suspends civil liberties, that member knows better, because that was the War Measures Act, and this isn't the War Measures Act, despite the fact that many conservatives had no problem conflating it. What does the invocation of the act accomplish? The most important thing to me, and I have not heard from anybody else saying that any other piece of legislation could have handled this, is it made it illegal to bring a child into what was going on out the front of this place. It made it a criminal offense to do that. Why would anybody be against that when we saw what we witnessed out there for 3 weeks? It restricted the entry so that it allowed police to set up checkpoints like they did around Ottawa to say, if your sole intention is to come into Ottawa to participate in this demonstration, this occupation, you are not allowed to do so. It allowed for the seizure of money and trucks. And I will say, when it relates to the seizure of money, in particular bank accounts, it is temporary. It needs to continually be reviewed. And to get to the point of the member from Condolin St. Paul, the RCMP issued a statement today, Mr. Speaker, that said the only names it has turned over to financial institutions are those that were the organizers and those that had trucks or vehicles that were not removed from the streets. They did not read the RCMP statement from today. If you don't believe that to be true, you are blatantly saying that the RCMP is lying to the public.
Shame on you.
Bang.
Yep.
Bang.
It also allowed for officers that were outside of Ontario to be brought into Ontario, to be used in a jurisdiction outside of their home province. And I know that conservatives will say, well, all this stuff you could have done with other laws and whatnot. Well, guess what? Nobody else did it. The province didn't want to do it. In order to bring officers from outside of, from Quebec into Ontario, there would have need to have been an agreement with the Ontario minister responsible with the province of Quebec. They didn't do that. What did Doug Ford do? He said, federal government, please invoke the Emergency Measures Act so that you can take care of this. That's exactly what happened. I want to talk about some of the people that support this and support this measure today. The Conservative Party of Canada has a newfound admiration for Tommy Douglas. They have invoked his name more in the last 4 days than I think they have ever invoked in this House over the last 100 and so years from, or since Tommy Douglas was here. But I'll give you a quote. And by the way, Tommy Douglas's opposition was to the War Measures Act, not the Emergency Measures Act. So why don't I read you a quote from a modern day NDP leader who actually is talking about the Emergency Measures Act. This is Ed Broadbent said, and I quote, "We've heard of the importance of following the money. With the use of this act, the federal government is able to do just that. The Emergencies Act give the means needed to stop any flow of funds that could have made the situation much worse." This is Ed Broadbent.
Modern day.
A modern day NDPer who's talking about this act, not the War Measures Act. But even if some Conservatives aren't going to listen to the NDP, let me quote some comments from their own. This is Senator Vern White and Peter MacKay, who issued a joint statement that said, "What we've seen in the occupation of Ottawa and blockages at border crossings is not the right of protest enshrined in our Constitution, but illegal activity that represents a national security and economic threat to Canada. Leaving aside the stated manifesto of the organizers to overthrow the government, these protests are weakening our economy and disrupting the freedoms of law-abiding citizens." Senator Vern White went on to say, "I support the use of the Emergency Measures Act." Those are Conservatives that said that. The Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police, the Law and Order, said, and I quote, "The Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police supports the fundamental objectives of the invocation of the Emergency Measures or the Emergencies Act that is intended to regulate and prohibit illegal public assemblies that lead to the breach of peace and to restrict the funding of all such illegal assemblies." That's the Association of the Chiefs of Police. So forgive me when Conservatives go out and dig up quotes from NDP members and Conservatives and other people from decades and generations ago. Forgive me if I'm unwilling to accept that, and I would rather listen to the people that know what's going on today. And I will say, one more thing. I think it's important to reflect, Mr. Speaker, on the people that have actually said, yes, we need the Emergency Measures Act. Yes, the Emergency Measures Act is important. Yes, the federal government should use the Emergency Measures Act. The Chief of Police of Ottawa said that. The Mayor of Ottawa said that. And of course, as I previously mentioned, Doug Ford said that. I hear the heckling from across the way, but why is that so important? Why do those voices matter? Because those are the voices that the direct jurisdiction was being affected. It was Doug Ford's province, it was Jim Watson's city, and it was the police chief's area. So, those are the actual people that said, yes, please come help us. And so, Mr. Speaker, as we look towards what some of the other provinces, how other provinces reacted to this, I can't help but think of the hypocrisy of Alberta's Premier, Jason Kenney. This is the man, this is a man that on February the 5th wrote a letter to the federal government saying, please send help. A desperate plea, a desperate cry for help because the province wasn't able to handle it on their own. This is the same man that a week later, a week and a half later, on February 18th said, "I'm suing you for sending help." That's literally what happened. It's remarkable. Now, I just want to address the issue of why do we still need these? You know, I've heard it a number of times today. It was in question period. The question keeps coming up. I'll preempt it by answering it now so that nobody has to ask me. They ask, well, why do you still need it? The streets are clear. You don't need this anymore. What an obtuse way to look at it. If you notice, if you follow Ottawa Police on Twitter, you'll notice that they just announced that they just reduced the secure area. It's an ongoing operation out there. They're not done. Just because the protesters might not be right outside of this building right now doesn't mean that everything's been cleared up. It's an ongoing operation. Don't even mind the fact that many of these people are not even that far from here. We're hearing about how they're congregating in various different areas. This is not over. The problem, the incredible work that was done by the police and the special forces out front of this building was remarkable. That work might be done. The stuff that was all over the news might be over in terms of what was sensational, but that doesn't mean that we've got and completely fixed this problem yet.
That's right.
And so, Mr. Speaker, in the last 3 minutes that I have, I just want to say that I'm very relieved that this particular act, that the creators of it, my predecessor, Flora MacDonald, had the foresight to say, we need to make sure that there's proper scrutiny to look at the way that the act was used. And that's where the inquiry comes into. And what I find the most interesting part about the way that that's worded, Mr. Speaker, is it says specifically that they have, as part of the inquiry, they have to look into the circumstances that led to the declaration being made. I am very much interested in hearing about the circumstances that led to this. I'm interested in hearing and learning about how this movement began, who was funding it, where the money was coming from, how the coordination was worked, who was helping the organization, who was directing them, who was giving them tips, who was basically counseling them, because I think that this will all be eye-opening to the public. And I look forward to that. I look forward to being able to see that play out in the public. I look forward to the public being able to learn about it. And at the end of the day, I look forward to Canadians knowing that based on that information, that based on that inquiry, they can know exactly what happened, rather than hearing these stories that we've been hearing these from the Conservatives and from people across the way. So, Mr. Speaker, you know, before the Bloc asked me a question about confidence or whatnot, I am very confident in my vote on this. I will vote in favor of this because this is the right thing for Canada and it's the right thing to do. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.